My name is Olha Martyniuk. I am a PhD student at the University of Regensburg, and I am a scholarship holder at the Leibniz Institute for East and Southeast European Studies. And today I am giving my presentation on the topic Turning Away from the Great Patriotic War, the Ukrainian Transformation of the Memory of the Second World War. The Second World War in Soviet state representation was viewed through the prism of the Great Patriotic War. This means that the years 1939, 1941 were excluded and many important events of this period were marginalized, including the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact of August 1939. This representation of the Second World War has also been characteristic of Russia at the state level, especially since the 2000s. It was the relationship with Russia and the political use of the so-called Great Patriotic War that strongly influenced the way Ukrainians commemorated the events of the Second World War in the last 30 years. Victory Day in the Second World War, or the Great Patriotic War as it's called in Russia, the 9th of May, has become an important date on the Russian holiday calendar since the 1990s. While some Soviet holidays, such as International Workers' Day or October Revolution Day, for which Soviet parades were held annually, have lost their significance. Since 1995, military parades in Moscow have become an annual practice for Victory Day celebrations. The Russian state authorities invited heads of states from different countries to Moscow for the parades. Ukrainian presidents such as Leibniz Kuchma, Viktor Yushchenko, and Viktor Yanukovych attended these parades. In addition, the Commonwealth of Independent States decided how to celebrate Victory Days. The Commonwealth of Independent States, or CIS, is an intergovernmental organization that was formed after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. Ukraine ended its participation in the CIS in 2018. The 1995 victory anniversary celebrations in the CIS countries were governed by joint decisions to celebrate this date and by the issuance of identical victory medals made in Russia and signed in Russian. In this picture, you can see the medals that veterans in all CIS countries received in 1995, including Ukraine. These medals were made at the Moscow and St. Petersburg mints. Cooperation with Russia in commemoration of the Second World War also took place at the level of monuments. In 1995, the Ukrainian leadership decided to donate a sculpture by Valentin Znoba to the Moscow Museum on Poklonnaya Hill to mark the 50th anniversary of the victory. The monument was dedicated to all Soviet soldiers who were missed during the Second World War. After Putin's second presidential term in 2004, the topic of patriotism and the so-called Great Patriotic War began to appear more frequently in official rhetoric. This was expressed, among other things, in state funding of various campaigns, organizations for youth and children, and changes in school textbooks. Since 2005, the St. Georg's ribbon has become the symbol of Victory Day in Russia. The practice of wearing this ribbon on the 19th of May was initiated in 2005 by the news agency RIA Novosti, and then this practice began to be actively promoted at the state level. In particular, in 2007, these ribbons were worn by Putin during the Victory Day celebrations. After the annexation of Crimea and the outbreak of war in Donbass in 2014, the ribbon became a symbol of support for Russian military actions. During Viktor Yanukovych's presidency of Ukraine from 2010 until 2014, there was a clear convergence with Russia's historical policy. On the 65th anniversary of Victory Day in 2010, the first and only military parade similar to Russia was held in Kyiv. Military personnel from Russia and Belarus also took part in the parade. The parade started an hour later than in Moscow, apparently so that Ukrainians could watch 2 parades a day on TV. Military parades were also held in other Ukrainian cities, such as Odessa, Sevastopol, Kerch. St. Georg's ribbon and red flags were present at all parades. For example, in Kiev, the victory flag and the red star were hung on a T-34 tank, while in Sevastopol, the column carried a 300-meter St. Georg's ribbon. Since 2014, Ukrainian-Russian disputes over the commemoration of the Second World War have intensified. The main reasons for this were the war in eastern Ukraine and the attempt to officially sever all ties with Russia as an aggressor state. Ukrainian historical policy of the time can be described as a desovietization of history. The calendar of holidays was changed. The 23rd of February as the main holiday for the Soviet army was replaced by the 14th of October, Day of Defenders of Ukraine. The 9th of May was officially called as Victory Day over Nazism in the Second World War. Formally, Victory Day over Fascism is the Great Patriotic War. Henceforth, the 8th of May was declared a day of remembrance and reconciliation, and a red poppy, which is also a symbol of the memory of fallen British soldiers in the First World War, was chosen as the new symbol. Added to this were the new slogans, Never Again and We Remember We Will Win, which on the one hand referred to the Western European culture of remembrance, which pays more attention to the victims of war, and on the other to the war in Donbass and the need to defeat Russia. In addition, the Ukrainian Institute of National Remembrance resumed its work. This institution played a key role in the decommunization process that followed in 2015. In April 2015, the Ukrainian parliament passed 4 so-called decommunization laws on the legal status and honoring the fighters for the independence of Ukraine in the 20th century, on immortalizing the victory over Nazism in the Second World War, 1939-1945, on access to the archives of the repressive organs of the communist totalitarian regime 1917-1991, and on the condemnation of the communist and Nazi totalitarian regimes in Ukraine and the ban on propaganda of their symbolism. As the Second World War played a particular role in shaping the identity of the Soviet Union, these laws were the most influential in reassessing the history of the Second World War, the role of Soviet political and military figures at the time, and the participation of Ukrainians in the war. On the one hand, these laws equated communism and National Socialism as totalitarian ideologies, condemning key Soviet high-ranking officials and the military, and prohibiting the naming of streets after them. On the other hand, they guaranteed the perpetuation of victory over National Socialism in the Second World War. At this time, new state practices of glorifying the Second World War began to take shape in Russia. One of the best-known initiatives of this kind integrated into state historical policy is the action The Immortal Regiment. During the Immortal Regiment marches, people carry photos of those who fought in the Second World War on sticks above them. A group of journalists from Tomsk organized the first action in 2012. After the popularity of the announced action, statesmen tried to integrate the idea as a new practice of celebrating Victory Day. In 2015, Putin joined this action and, like other participants, carried a photo of his father to the Red Square in Moscow. Similar actions in Ukraine were held by pro-Russian organizations and parties in various Ukrainian cities. Since 2017, a Victory Regiment had been held in Zaporizhia, similar to the Immortal Regiment. The founders included representatives of the Communist Party of Ukraine and former deputies of the city council from the Party of Region. regions. To circumvent decommunization laws, people at these events wore red ribbons instead of St. Georg's ribbons, or simply red flags instead of Soviet flags. Their activities were repeatedly criticized for their links to Russia. As a result, there was a need at the state level to create separate practices to commemorate the Second World War. An example of the creation of a Ukrainian dimension of the Second World War were the popular videos with the hero of the USSR, Ivan Zaluzhny, created by the Ukrainian Institute of National Remembrance. He talked in the video about his only grandson, who in the summer of 2014 went to fight in the Donbass and died. This video symbolized a certain continuity of the struggle for their land, from a World War II veteran to a grandson who died in the struggle for modern Ukrainian independence in our time. In 2017, the Ukrainian Institute of National Remembrance created an information campaign dedicated to the Day of Remembrance and Reconciliation, in which Ivan Zaluzhny took part together with a veteran of the Ukrainian Insurgent Army, Stepan Petrash. Ukrainian Insurgent Army, or UPA, was a Ukrainian nationalist guerrilla group whose goal was to create an independent Ukraine, and which fought against the Soviet Union as well as against Nazi Germany. This information campaign focused on the fact that both Soviet soldiers and UPA soldiers fought for their land, and on the fact of reconciliation between the two groups of veterans. In addition, the Institute of National Remembrance launched the educational site Ukrainian Second World War and relevant exhibitions in the cities of Ukraine, which told about the participation of Ukrainians in the Second World War. The final denial of Russian and Soviet traditions of honoring the Second World War was caused by the full-scale war in Ukraine in 2022. This was the main reason for revising the practices that previously existed in Ukraine. If earlier the presence of monuments dedicated to the Second World War did not provoke much discussion, now the question arises as to how appropriate they are and what they symbolize. This was reflected in particular in the demolition of certain Soviet monuments in the cities of Ukraine, especially in the demolition of Soviet military equipment. An example of this is the demolition of the T-34 tank from the pedestal in Kamenets-Podilsky in 2022. The local authorities tried to decommunize the pedestal back in 2016 when they wanted to dismantle only the Soviet symbols of a sickle and a hammer placed on the pedestal. However, the initiators of the decision then did not have enough votes to adopt it. In general, one of the arguments of local actors in favor of the demolition of such monuments is that these monuments glorify Soviet militarism, and that at the end of the Second World War, it was not the liberation of Ukrainian cities by Soviet troops, but Soviet occupation. Overall, since the 1990s, the Ukrainian culture of commemoration of the Second World War has undergone a significant transformation. This was due in particular to a move away from the Soviet and Russian understanding of the war as the Great Patriotic War since 2014, as well as Ukraine's distancing itself from Russian practices of commemoration of the Second World War. With the outbreak of the full-scale war in Ukraine, these sentiments only intensified, this making a complete break from Soviet and Russian practices in commemoration of the Second World War.